everyone. I'm Erica Wilhite. I'm the Arts Learning and Communities Director here at the Arts Council. I am also the ADA Coordinator, and I will be introducing our presenter today. Real quick, I'm just going to do a test check. Beth, can you speak, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone.
How does that sound? In the back? Thumbs up in the back? Okay. Beth is going to present on Zoom. There will be a chance to do, we'll have a Q&A afterwards, and we'll be handing the mic around for that. But I am going to go ahead. I want to get rid of me. How do I do that? I'm sorry. I'm hiding it. Okay, Beth. So we are joined today by Beth Bienvenu, the Director of the Office of Accessibility at the National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA, where she manages the NEA's technical assistance and advocacy work devoted to making the arts accessible for people with disabilities, older adults, veterans, and people in institutional settings. And Beth is going to take it over from here. Beth, tell us a little bit more about your work.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Erica, and thank you to the Oklahoma Arts Council for inviting me to speak. I find this the most important topic of all, supporting people with disabilities as audiences, students, and artists with disabilities, and how to make your projects accessible. As Erica said, my name is Beth Bienvenu. I am the Accessibility Director at the NEA. And I'm a white woman with shoulder-length brown hair, wearing a black and white print top. And I am speaking to you from my office in my house in Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. We've been working remotely, and this has been such a great opportunity to speak to communities all across the country. Whereas in the past, we would have to say, sorry, we can't join you. We don't have enough travel funds, or we don't have the time to travel. So I love being able to do this, and I hope it works out well to have me speaking to you from a screen. So just a couple of little things. First, I am a person who stutters, so that might come out. And if I'm pausing or hesitating, I'll say it's because of stuttering and not because I forgot what I was going to say. So you might hear that come out. I also get a bit of a cough, so I'll be taking sips of tea or water and maybe popping a mint or something. So I also want to just mention that I am a University of Oklahoma grad. I got my doctorate there. I also worked for the University of Oklahoma with their degree programs in Germany, actually throughout Europe. Back in the late 90s, when my husband and I were stationed in Heidelberg, and worked with faculty and students on the campus, or on the military bases, and also did a doctoral program with them in organizational leadership. And these were programs for military, civilians, and family members. So I worked and got my doctorate. I spent time on campus and got to enjoy 100-degree Julys for 2 summers. But I loved being able to experience Norman and Oklahoma City. Oh, and also our program also partnered with Cameron University there in Lawton, and to do a couple of degree programs as well. So I got to meet some faculty from Cameron. But that was years ago, and I'm sure a lot have retired by now. So I guess I should just go ahead and get started with the presentation. I'll be about a half hour on slides, and then we can open it up for Q&A. So after 3.5 years, we're getting better at this. So let me know if this doesn't work, but I think we're good to go. So just a brief introduction to my work. So you may be familiar with the National Endowment for the Arts. We were established by Congress in 1965. We're an independent federal agency that's the largest funder of the arts in communities nationwide, and a catalyst of public and private support for the arts. And part of that is funding the state arts agencies, including the Oklahoma Arts Council. And that helps us really spread our funds around. And they do a wonderful job of supporting the arts throughout the state of Oklahoma. My office, it was in my bio, but we provide resources to make the arts accessible. We work with applicants, grantees, disabled artists. We also provide, this is through technical assistance and training. We train NEA staff to help them ensure that they are they know how to work with the applicants and grantees to ensure accessibility of the projects that we're funding. And then we also, again, work with the state arts agencies and regional arts organizations, providing training, peer learning. We gather at conferences. And so I've really enjoyed being able to work with Erica through those trainings and peer learning experiences. So today we are going to talk about disability in the United States, just briefly, talk about the accessibility laws and regulations, and then that will lead into a conversation around planning for accessibility in the arts, some of the things involved with that. We'll also provide some resources at the end, and you'll see some hyperlinks throughout. And we have made this PowerPoint presentation available on our website. You can jot this down. We'll also have it at the end for you in case you miss it. It's arts.gov. I love our website. It's the best website in government, arts.gov/Oklahoma2023.pdf. All right, so once again, I need to take little sips of tea so I can get through without coughing. I don't know if you can see me, if you only see my slides, so you may not notice when I'm taking a little break. So a little bit about disability in the United States. Approximately 1 in 4 adults in the United States are living with disabilities. That's about a quarter of adults throughout the US. 44% of adults over age 65 have disabilities, and people with disabilities comprise the largest minority group in the United States. Disability is measured in different ways by different agencies, government agencies. There are international numbers, and the CDC, that's where we get this data. There's also the census, which says it's more like 1 in 5. So it just depends on how it's measured. But because of with this CDC data, we're able to extract the estimates within each state. So in Oklahoma, it's higher, about 34%. 1 in 3 of adults in Oklahoma are living with disabilities. And I gave a little bit of a breakdown based on type. 16% have a mobility disability, 15% have a cognition disability. That could be people with autism spectrum disorder, traumatic brain injury, other forms of things involving the brain and cognition. And then hearing and vision are 9% for hearing and 6% for vision disability. You will hear me throughout trying to read as much from the slides without it getting too much reading from the slides, because that's a form of accessibility, to make sure that everything on the slide is conveyed verbally. So you'll see me reading as much as I can, but not trying to get too bogged down in it. So what do all these statistics mean? The prevalence of disability across the US and in Oklahoma means that your programs will likely engage people with disabilities in some way. And this can be as staff, as volunteers, board members, artists, students, and audiences. So it's just not just the people coming in to your programs, it's also the people that help run your programs and on your staff. Disability is also part of our equity efforts. We've done a lot in the last several years to work on equity and access and diversity within the arts, and disability is part of that. We see accessibility as an organizational asset, because when you make things accessible for one group of people, it often means it's accessible for everyone. We call that the curb cut effect, where the curb cuts at the end of sidewalks aren't just for wheelchairs. They help bicycles, strollers, roller bags, etc. Disability is a vital and often overlooked part of DEI efforts, and we're trying to pull it into that, because it's an important part of this work. And also, disability is intersectional. So as you're helping people from all groups have access and working on your diversity, that includes people with disabilities, among other, all groups have people with disabilities. Disability provides a unique perspective in artistic creation. We have a subset of the field called disability arts, where the person's lived experience with disability helps to form and create the artistic experience and the work that they're creating. And the results, we also have deaf theater, physically integrated dance, and all sorts of work throughout all arts forms. So it just adds to the array and the diversity of the art that's out there. And then, as we saw during COVID, virtual access has allowed for a wider reach. How many of you or organizations that you know put your programming online? It opens your work to new audiences, people who otherwise might not be able to get into your auditoriums or your museums or other spaces. Regardless of how accessible you are, they might not feel comfortable in certain environments or have difficulty with transportation, et cetera. And so virtual access allowed all of us to access the arts, and it helped increase your audiences. So please keep that in mind as you continue to work and open back up. So just a little bit about employment in the arts. October, it's Arts and Humanities Month, but it's also Disability Employment Awareness Month, or NDEAM, we like to call it. And it's a chance to recognize accomplishments and progress of people with disabilities in the workplace and help employers expand their access to potential employees and provide accommodations. And as the theme throughout this, their theme this month is advancing access and equity. And you can find resources on that at dol.gov/ODEP. And I actually used to work there, so I have a lot of connection with the resources here. And through that, I was able to develop some resources as part of a new toolkit on careers in the arts for people with disabilities. We developed this in partnership with Art Beyond Sight, which is an arts education organization. And I'll talk about it in a second, but this is a toolkit designed to help improve the employment outcomes for people with disabilities in the arts, whether it's artists or arts people participating in arts education, youth, other cultural workers, because there have been so many barriers that people with disabilities have found to working in the arts. And we've worked on this over the years. That some of the barriers include not being able to earn an income and also retain their benefits. So through Social Security disability benefits and healthcare, and also just lack of access. So these resources, this toolkit provides resources for artists with disabilities, including youth and other cultural workers. And then the next three groups I call the demand side. We have the supply side and the demand side. So the demand side, trying to make the case for employing artists with disabilities as presenters, curators, casting directors, anything that you're doing where you're seeking artists, be sure to include to cast your net wide and cultivate opportunities for disabled artists. For arts educators, whether that's in the schools, higher ed, conservatories, or just in community arts education, making sure that your studios and galleries are accessible, your studios and classrooms are accessible, and that you are including, you're developing techniques that can make it easier for students with disabilities. And then also arts funders, whether it's state and local government or federal funders or the private philanthropy, making the case for funding because it's crucial, as we all know. And just a bit of description of these four photos. These are the photos that are the cover photos for each of the sections in our toolkit. And the top one is a man with dark skin. He's a Ghanaian dancer in New York City, Siddiqui Konde, who dances on his hands, and he's incredibly talented, and he's one of the NEA's National Heritage Fellows. The next photo is a photo of the Blind Boys of Alabama, which is also a group is one of our National Heritage Fellows. The third one is three women in a dance studio, two of them in wheelchairs, and it's the group Dancing Wheels in Cleveland, Ohio, that does physically integrated dance. And then the bottom one is a photo of Deaf West Theater in Los Angeles doing a production of, oh no, I forgot. It's a Greek tragedy. Oh, I'm sorry. It was a production that they did, and there's a number of actors. I just thought it was a very striking photo and included it as for the cover of the Arts Funders section. So now we're going to dive into accessibility planning. Supporting disabled artists is an incredibly important part of our work, but so is helping arts organizations with their compliance with accessibility laws and going beyond compliance. I just want to mention here that there are 7 images of accessibility symbols that we funded the development of about 30 years ago. They've been a little bit updated, and you can access them at the link at the bottom that we'll have in our PowerPoint that you can access. So there are 2 laws. The first one is the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, you might have heard of 504 plans in schools. This is one of the first key laws that required accessibility for people in different sectors. So it prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in programs conducted by federal agencies, such as the events and activities the NEA conducts, and then those receiving federal financial assistance, such as NEA grantees. And there might be a number of you in the room. It's also to the state arts agencies and the funding that they receive when it trickles down. So the funds that the Oklahoma Arts Council awards also have the same requirements. And when I mention 504 plans, that's because school districts often receive federal money, whether it's through the states or directly. So they also have to comply. So that was in 1973. And so that didn't cover everybody. That didn't cover state and local government. That didn't cover places of public accommodation like museums and theaters and hotels and restaurants. So the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990, which you're probably more familiar with. And it prohibits this discrimination and ensures equal opportunity for people with disabilities. So Title II of the ADA covers state and local government services. So that's your state and local arts agencies. And then Title III covers pretty much most everybody else. So places of public accommodations, museums, performing arts centers, theaters, galleries, classrooms, and even outdoor spaces. And there's some new rules coming out about sidewalks and paths of travel to make sure that there's more guidance on how those outdoor spaces are ensuring accessibility. So this is a very high level overview, but the main thing to take away is that all organizations are legally required to provide reasonable and necessary accommodations for staff and visitors with disabilities. So now at this point I would ask for questions, but we can save questions for the end. So what does this mean for accessibility planning? And what does accessibility planning include? Again, we have the accessibility symbols here. So things to consider. You have to think about your policies and procedures, such as how will you take accommodation requests? What are the deadlines? What are your policies around accessible seating and what is available? So you have to have policies and procedures in place and train staff on that. We also we'll talk about physical accessibility, program accessibility, and electronic accessibility. We'll go into more detail. So around your policies and we talk about organizational commitment to accessibility. You have to have buy-in from the top for this to happen. So the leaders need to take the lead on this and make sure that organizations have the capacity to ensure accessibility. And another important component is having a dedicated staff person to oversee accessibility and compliance with the 2 laws I mentioned. This doesn't have to be a full-time position. You don't have to hire a new person for this. This can be a responsibility of someone on your staff. However, they need to be trained and understand what's needed and to be that advocate within your organization and within the community. And we encourage you to put their contact information. It doesn't have to be the person's name. It could just be access or info at the name, at your your email address. So they know, people need to know who to contact. Have that information up front on your website as a tab, as part of the, visit our space page. Make sure it's clear, because so many people have to go digging to find this information. And then creating an accessibility policy, as I mentioned, policies around, accommodation, and publicizing it on your website. So another thing that's really important is budgeting for accessibility, making sure that you know the costs of providing accommodations. We'll get to some of the accommodations soon, but I'm sure you're aware of the different things like sign language or captioning. Research the options in your community and be ready to provide the accommodations. Make sure that you have the funds available, and if you don't end up using them, they can go into another fund. But also include these costs in your grant application budgets. There are, we see so many grant applications come in without any mention of the cost of the accommodations. So put it in there, and if you don't use it, you can use it for something else. And access advisory committees. There is a phrase, I think I have another slide on this, it says, "Nothing about us without us." Decisions about disability should be made or advised by people with disabilities. Make sure it's a diverse group of representing various disabilities that can advise you on different policy decisions and other accessibility considerations. And then train your staff and your volunteers on your access services, what is available, and then also any equipment, such as assisted listening equipment, how to use it, and how to show the patron how to use it. Make sure your box office knows what you have available, what your seating options are, things like that. And then also how to serve patrons with disabilities, how to interact, how to offer assistance. I'm not going to get into details about language or how to do this, but we'll have another session coming up that in a couple months, where we can go into a little more detail. I've touched on this, so make sure that you include information about your access services in all of your publicity, whether it's a press release, programs, media, website, email, like what accommodations will be available and what you can provide upon request, and with that contact information. Those disability symbols I mentioned, this is where you can use them. People will recognize that this is the symbol for Braille or for captioning. And then any additional information about your facility. This is really important. This doesn't have to be in your press release, but you can have it on your website. Where's the accessible entrance? If you are coming to an arts venue, how often do you go to an arts venue and you need to find where the entrance is? Okay, it's over there. But if you're in a wheelchair, or you use a mobility device, or you have chronic pain, you need to know where the accessible entrance is. If it's not the main entrance, you don't want to have to go searching all around the building or walk down the block and exert additional energy to find the accessible entrance. So making sure that that's on your website, and then also mentioning any other services that you provide. Okay. Part of planning is assessing your current accessibility. What is your building like? What are you up to code on everything? Have you done a run through of everything in your building for accessibility? And we'll get to that in a minute. We have some checklists. We have a brief accessibility checklist, which I believe you have copies of. It's very basic. If you go to the link in the PDF, on the screen, you will see it. There are some hyperlinks in it that will take you to some resources. We also have a self-evaluation workbook. We require all grantees of ours to complete a self-evaluation workbook. And the one that we have available is on our website. However, it's a bit outdated. It's got some issues, and we are working to improve it, but we are waiting for the Department of Justice to let us update our regulations under 504. All agencies have to update our regs, And we can't create any new materials, any new technical assistance materials until that's done. So our hands are kind of tied, but we're working to make it a little easier to use. It's been around for a long time. We're trying to update it. So, but you can take a look. It still has great information. It's just a little hard to fill out. So you can also hire consultants. There's people in your community, people across the country that can help you virtually. Find consultants, especially people with disabilities, who can help you assess your accessibility of programs and physical access. You can also form an access committee that represents different disabilities. I mentioned that before, people with vision and hearing and cognitive and other disabilities. And then hire user testers for your programs and facilities, people like those secret shoppers that can come and check out how things work, especially your websites. And we'll get to that in a minute. And as I mentioned, nothing about us without us. That was the rallying cry of the disability rights movement, because decisions were have been made throughout the decades about people with disabilities without consulting them. And now actually the phrase is shifting to nothing without us, making sure that people with disabilities are part of everything. So make sure they're represented on your boards, staff, volunteers, grant panels, committees, conduct a community needs assessment, partner with organizations in your community that serve people with disabilities, that can help recruit people to help you with this, and also, assess your programming, and then engage with artists with disabilities and those in the disability community, or partner with disability community organizations. So artists have such a great perspective on this work and could be a great asset. And the one thing we also advise is to pay people, pay your artists, pay the advisory committee. It can just be a small honorarium, but it's just as important as paying your artists. All right, so I'm running a little bit behind, but I'll run through these. Talk about assessing your physical accessibility. I've got on the screen a link to the design standards that you can reference to assess your accessibility within your facilities. So some of the basics are just, how do you get in the door? Are the facilities, including historic facilities, are they accessible to people with mobility disabilities? And again, that can include staff, volunteers, participants, etc. Some examples: just ground level no step entry, or a ramp, and then also elevators within your building. So go through your building. Can people get around without having to, even those 1 or 2 stairs present a big barrier. Directional signage for the accessible entrance and the paths, as I mentioned. If you don't know where the accessible entrance is, makes it exert a lot of physical energy to get there. Have directional signage. Integrated and dispersed wheelchair seating in meeting rooms, auditoriums, etc. Those standards for the number, like ratio of how many seats you need, that's in the ADA design standards in that link. And then make sure your box office, your countertops, that they're wheelchair accessible, or there's a way to provide service if the box office level is too high. Think about your display cases, your exhibit areas, your countertops, restrooms and water fountains. Of course, that goes back decades, back when we used to use water fountains. Think about your emergency exits, and are they accessible? Your audiovisual emergency, or your emergency alarms, are they both sound and visual? And then if you have parking, you need to follow the requirements for having accessible spaces. And then the path of travel from that parking to your facility, your accessible entrance, is that free and clear? Think about your artists, the stage and your backstage, the dressing rooms. We think about audiences all the time, but are they able to get into get on the stage? Are there dressing rooms? We've seen a lot of things in theater and Broadway, wheelchair users having to redo the backstages because they're so old. So also in arts education, the studios people are working in, classrooms and workspaces. And then if you represent an artist residency, where people live and work in a space, making sure that the living spaces are accessible. If they're all gathering in the kitchen, can a wheelchair user get into that kitchen or that dining room or that place where the artists are hanging out? So these are things that we're working with the Artist Communities Alliance on helping organizations with those questions. Staff, are your offices, like when you say backstage, that can be your offices. Are they accessible to staff? Also think, especially including historic buildings. Do you offer remote work or hybrid access for employees? Sometimes when the offices are not accessible, they'll allow hybrid work or remote work for employees. Or let's say you are in an inaccessible workspace and someone breaks their leg. You may not have someone with a disability, but someone can easily acquire a disability. So offering remote work is an option in those cases. And so you need to have a plan in place for that. Okay, program accessibility. I took the little wheelchair symbol out because we're just focusing on program access. And just so you know, the left to right, we have the symbols mean access for people who are blind. The next one is closed captioning, whereas open captioning will have an O. The next one's for Braille, of course, sign language, audio description, and then assisted listening devices on the right. And this says effective communication and auxiliary aids. These are terms from the law. Effective communication is providing, like the examples above, for communication access, and then auxiliary aids would be the technology and equipment to do so. So consider all aspects of your project activities and whether they're accessible. How is the content and activity being shared, communicated, and implemented? And think about various disabilities and how people would access it. So for communication access, I'm only going to talk about two areas. One is hearing, one is vision. So for people with hearing disabilities, you've got sign language. Think about are there interpreting companies in your community? And if not, there's often remote interpreting available. Transcription of podcasts and videos and various activities like that. Assisted listening devices, which have been around for a very long time, and making sure that you have up-to-date systems. There is hearing loop technology where they embed the wire in a box office or under the seating in an auditorium for people to tap into. And then finally, captioning is the one that I think we use the most, that people, even without hearing issues, use. We have, I believe it's on the screen right now, and has become so much more available with AI technologies, with Zoom and other online virtual events, having that available. But there's also real-time captioning with a live transcriber or live captioner that's transcribing the content. There is varying debate within the deaf community about whether they prefer AI, automated captions, or whether they prefer a live captioner. There are pros and cons to both. And if you're working with the deaf community or individuals with hearing loss, you might want to consult with them on which they prefer. But always having the captions available in a live event is, online is a really easy way to provide access. Vision disabilities, audio description, or also called visual description, is a very common way to make visual material accessible. That can be done in a live event. It can be on video. It could be like an audio tour within a museum. Having alternate formats of print materials, like large print or Braille, having that available or on request. And then tactile opportunities. You might have heard of or use touch tours, where people can feel objects from an exhibit, from a museum, a gallery, or even a live performance before the performance, being able to touch objects on the stage. And then some other examples of program access. We will talk about accessible electronic materials and website in a minute. Having plain language. we love to have language, writers love to have really, inventive forms of communication. Bureaucrats love to have very technical forms of communication, but keeping language plain is a really important form of access. This says 3rd to 5th grade level. Some people say 8th grade level. It also makes translation into other languages easier. And then we've talked a lot about, you've probably heard of sensory friendly programming. You might have it in your organization. And this is to help people with autism, people who've had traumatic brain injury, epilepsy, migraines. It really helps a lot of people, having reduced lighting and sounds, warning for strobes, keeping facilities and programs fragrance free. It can be separate. It can be in addition to another program, like having an extra performance that's sensory friendly, or it can just be embedded in your program. Another a way to provide access is scheduling time for breaks. Like if it's a long performance, if it's a long conference, or meetings, having times for breaks that gives people a chance to take care of any physical needs they might have, or take a break from concentrating. Having quiet hours and quiet spaces. People might need to get away from the loud noises and the bright lights of a performance, or even a museum and the crowds. Or offering, like in a museum, opening an hour early for people with sensory needs. And then pre-visit materials. You might have heard the term social story. Materials that explain step by step what to expect when coming to a new venue, a new experience. These are used it can be used for children with different disabilities. They can be used for adults, and they can help anybody. Sometimes you just need to know, where am I going to park? When do I get my tickets? When does the box office open? So these types of things can be really, really helpful at various levels. Electronic accessibility. We hear more and more. Our smartphones and our computers are providing more and more access, but making your websites, your films, videos, podcasts, and virtual events accessible is really important. You may be aware that people with vision disabilities often use software that reads things aloud on the computer, on their phones. So in making sure that your websites are screen reader friendly. They can be tab controlled, that everything is in a logical flow. So this goes back to your web designers and your web developers when developing a new website or reassessing your website. But easy things you can do, having alternative text for images or alt tags, so that when the screen reader comes across the image, it will just give a brief description of it. Making sure that your fonts are accessible, nothing too scripty, anything too flowery. Make sure it's legible and readable, and that the color contrast is strong. And there are color contrast checkers, and there's a link to one at the end. Captioning, open means it's always on. Close means you can turn it off and on. And then transcriptions of any of the content in your virtual events or your videos. Providing a transcript can be really helpful. Like, I find that if I don't want to sit through a 15-minute video, if there's a transcript, I can skim through it. You can do a search for certain keywords. So I find them very useful. ASL interpretation, that can be done online. In your Zoom meeting, that could be one of the windows up there. So you can provide it, or you can have it upon request. Make sure that you advertise that in advance and give a deadline. And then visual description of what is on the screen if you have images. And I tried to describe the photos on my earlier, and that's always useful. I just have a few more slides. So the accommodations process, as I've mentioned a few things on previous slides, that accommodations can be made upon request. And that's when you need to give a deadline. Work with your vendor, your ASL interpreting company. How far in advance do we need to book it? And then make that the deadline. You can offer it for specific performances or activities. So you have 20 performances of a play you're going to offer it at specific performances. But you need to make sure you advertise that and work with the community so that they know that they can come on those performances and have it be accessible. But what's even better is when it's included as part of every activity. Having captioning devices they can have at their seats, or having it up next to the stage, or with a lecture. That's the best form of access. And then making sure that you have all of your contact information and process available on your website and promotional activities. Just even at the bottom, at the bottom of your announcement or your email or your Facebook post, say, captioning will be provided. Please contact us if you need other accommodations by this date. Okay, that's it for all of the content. And now I have some resources. And again, you'll be able to access this through the link with the downloadable PowerPoint. You have the brief accessibility checklist. We've got other resources on our website. Back early in COVID, we developed a resource guide on making your virtual event accessible. It might be a tiny bit out of date because things have, more resources are out there, but the general information is good. Our 504 workbook. We have a webinar on our YouTube page that we recorded a year and a half ago on the compliance requirements for NEA grantees. So if you're applying for an NEA grant, our new guidelines will come out in December for next year. You might want to take a look at this webinar, and there's a link. I believe there's a link to the PowerPoint, so you can just flip through that if you'd like. And then our downloadable accessibility symbols. Let's see. So other resources. I highly recommend the ADA Technical Assistance Centers. There are 10 of them across the country, and you can look up the one for Oklahoma. I forgot to look it up. Was it Great Plains? We can look it up later. They provide resources for employers, for organizations, for companies on providing access and complying with ADA. WebAIM, I should have spelled this out, is it's a website that talks about electronic accessibility. It provides all the resources, all the techie details you can see there. There's an accessibility evaluation tool for your website. So you plug that in, you plug in your web address, and it will give you a rundown of everything you need to do to fix your website. Accessibilitychecker.org is another one. And then there's another color contrast checker. I believe that's the one. I forget the name of that one. But you can check that out. And you can always reach out to us. Our main inbox is accessibility@arts.gov. My email address is bienvenub@arts.gov. And you can download this PowerPoint at arts.gov/Oklahoma2023.pdf. Phew. I think I got through it all. And I guess we have about 15 minutes for questions.
Yes, thank you, Beth. Thank you so much.
I'll leave this up for a minute, and then I'll take it down.
Okay, and then I'm going to turn captioning back on when we do that. We are having some noise interference from the activities around us in the conference center. So did everyone get a good shot of that? And the PDF is downloadable. Okay, excellent. So like she said, we have about 15 minutes remaining, and this is a good time to take your questions. Hold on, I'm trying to make this a little bigger. So I think I am the only one in the room, so I will be. I've got a question about. You're good.
Okay, and I came in a couple of minutes late, so I don't really miss anything, but if you are in a building, it's on the national.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing.
All right. Okay, can you hear me now?
Let me try. Beth, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Maybe
so
I'll turn on the caption.
Laryngitis, sorry.
That's okay.
We're in a building that's on the National Registry of Historic Places. And I walked in a couple of minutes late, so I don't know if you talked about a resource for that, but if there's something we can look at or read up on, because we're not allowed to change the structure of the historic building, but we definitely need to make some improvements for accessibility.
Yeah, this is a really important topic, and I unfortunately don't have any resources off the top of my head. There used to be some, but there was, a lot of shifting of websites and resources being taken down. Um, if you go to the ADA design standards link that I had earlier, there's information there. There are historic preservation organizations. The National Park Service has done a lot of work around this. And you might want to check, historic preservation and the National Park Service. I attended a wonderful webinar by a accessibility expert there, and I don't know if that's available publicly. But yeah, I don't have any specific resources right now because things kind of shifted. But if you want to give me a call or reach out to me, I can try to do a bit more research on that.
Excellent, thank you. And if anyone is having trouble hearing, the text is very small on the screen, so you may want to move up a little closer to the captioning if you need that. I've got a question here.
Hi, I work with a visual arts organization, and we definitely need to be doing better, particularly on descriptions about the visual aspects of our work that maybe people experiencing low vision or no vision can experience. And I wonder if you've seen any organizations really doing well in that area, just as best practices, so that we can make sure we get it, right in some ways.
Are you referring specifically to just visual and audio description?
Well, I'm thinking about, when we have a large exhibition coming up, and it's a pop-up. We don't own this space. We're typically out in the community and other spaces with our work, but bringing visual arts to communities. And we currently, if you are experiencing low vision or blindness, I don't know how you would interact with the exhibition. And so I want us to, be better about that.
Yeah.
Or even tours, Eric and I talked about, that's almost an art form in and of itself, almost like a curator-led tour with someone that can explain the art.
Right. And there are people that are doing really interesting work with that. I know the Smithsonian is doing some good work there. They have their Office of Accessibility. It's hard for me I can't pull it up right now. They've been doing some good work. The National Park Service, US Park Service has been doing some work around it. And I was going to send you to the American Council of the Blind. They have their whole audio description project where they are, they're training people, but this is about audio description for film and video. I'm just trying to think who else. So the one resource, and maybe Erica can help provide this, the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts has their VSA and accessibility work that they're doing. And Erica and I were at the LEAD conference, Leadership Exchange and Arts and Disability, where people come together to hear from the experts on accessibility and how to do it. And they have a lot of really good speakers and events, and you can join the I'm not supposed to endorse anything, but this is a group that really is helpful. That through the Kennedy Center, you can join a network of people that are doing this work. And there's a listserv, there's online resources, there's online forums, webinars, and lots of discussion. And I know that there's been some conversation around that there. So that's just one recommendation I can make. And I don't know if Erica can provide the information on that. Or I can send it to her.
That's great, Beth. And I had some other ideas I can share with you, Rebecca, for examples. Another question for Beth. Okay,
Yeah. Hi, Beth. Are there any grants available for small to mid-sized nonprofits to either make their programming accessible or hire people with disabilities anything like that?
Well, you can apply, we don't have specific grants for access or support for people with disabled artists, but you can apply for, under our regular granting activities for sorry, I'm trying to think of another organization popped in my head, but you can apply through our grants for arts projects. The next deadline is in February, or our Challenge America grant, which targets specifically projects that serve traditionally underserved audiences, including people with disabilities. And that's a flat $10,000 grant. That deadline's in April. Our guidelines will come out in December. Erica, I don't know if you know, if I believe that Mid-America Arts Alliance has a grant. I believe they have a grant for accessibility and or programs, but those are small. So you might want to check them out. Mid-America Arts Alliance.
I'll add to that local resources through the Oklahoma Arts Council. While we don't have an access grant specifically, any of our grants can be used for services, for improvements, expansion, enhancement of what you're already doing. We cannot fund like putting in a ramp, so no capital improvements per se, but lots of programming ideas that you want to do and expand upon. Absolutely part of this grant can be used for that.
Yeah, and also we don't fund capital improvements either, just project funding.
Yes, another question.
Hi, I'm an art teacher in a public high school, and funding's always an issue. So when we have accessibility needs for students, who am I supposed to talk to within the district to make sure that we get the equipment that we need for the students in our class?
Most schools and school districts have specialists in providing accommodations, the 504 plans or the IEPs. So I would just check with the school district or the administration and ask who those people, who that office is or who the individual is. But they usually have someone that is responsible for that.
And within the but like if a principal doesn't know, like who would above that, would it be like the special education? Probably.
I would check with special education. Yeah.
Thank you.